topic. So we will not discuss in detail about the technical things about the generative AI. No. But we will discuss about how these new tools can be used in maybe it's not a good way, and then threat our democracy. Okay, let's give a warm applause to Professor Beznosov first.
Good morning. Can you hear me? Yeah. If you can hear me, just raise your hand. Also, I always welcome questions during the call. So again, any questions, any types of questions, just raise your hand and I will catch. If I see you raising your hand, I'll give you floor for questions. It would be great if you ask questions during the talk as well, rather than waiting until the very end. And at the same time, you will have time at the end to ask and discuss more questions. But I would like to start with this short 3-minute video.
Into the unknown.
Will stay on the moon to rest in peace.
More vigilant with what we trust from the internet. It's a time when we need to rely on trusted news sources. These brave men, Neil Armstrong and Edwin Aldrin, know that there is no hope for their recovery.
Okay, so I hope it was a good teaser for the talk that I'm going to give. So I'm going to talk about how, if generative AI is weaponized, then how that can amplify threats to democracy and what can be done about it. I will talk about some of the threats to democracy and how exactly use of generative AI can make them even worse. But before talking about the subject of the talk, I want to quickly introduce myself. I'm, as Aspen already introduced me, with the University of British Columbia since 2003, where I founded and direct laboratory for education research and secure systems engineering. And before that, between my PhD and my academic career, I worked in different startups for 3 years. And during the time, I also contributed to different security-related standards, such as standards on corporate security. I wonder how many people in this room know what corporate stands for. Just curious, probably nobody. It's a common object request broker architecture, which was used as a middleware for distributed systems, remote procedure calls. These days, it's all based on web services and XML, but in the 90s, corporate was their thing. Whereas extensible access control markup language, XSML, it's used these days for representing access control decisions when they're sent from one entity to another entity in the enterprise, as well as for making queries, access control queries. And you can see some of the books that I co-authored. At UBC, we do a lot of academic research, but we also collaborate with different industry. You can see some of the companies we collaborated in the research group. And if you have more questions about my research, feel free to come after the talk or after, like during the query period, ask those questions. So today specifically we'll discuss first of all what generative AI is, what its capabilities are, and how it can be used, as well as how it can be abused to threaten democracy. And I will touch upon avenues for managing the risks of these threats. This is a new topic for me. I'm still exploring it, so I'm trying to understand, so I use this talk as an opportunity to kind of put together my thoughts about the whole domain. I don't know how many of you took any courses on AI, but just to make sure that we are all on the same page, very quickly, 2 simple slides on generative AI. So these are taken from Introduction to Deep Learning by MIT. It's an open source course. You can download videos or watch videos of the lectures of the course as well as slides. I found them very helpful for my own understanding of deep learning and specifically generative AI. But essentially, the idea of generative AI is to use recursive neural networks for, like once it's trained, then it's able to predict, you can see the one-to-many text generation image captioning over here. So it's able to, given input, produce output, sequence of outputs, and that can continue for a long time. That's essentially what ChatGPT does. It's a predictor of the next word on steroids. That's basically the idea of ChatGPT with some fancy additional stuff. And it can be also used for many-to-many, for example, translations or forecasting, music generation, and so on. Essentially, the generative modeling is training deep neural networks to model specific distribution. So given the distribution, for example, a bunch of samples of images, then generative AI models are trained to generate new samples that didn't observe before. So those samples don't necessarily exist in the original data set. So the idea sounds very simple, but if you train these models on very large amounts of data, then they start mimicking human ability to generate new text, new images, new sounds, and so on. So Gen AI, as it's usually known, can be used in many different tasks, from producing text to producing images to even helping programmers develop code, generating music, sounds, videos, creating 3D models using the text prompts, then transferring styles, for example, taking a picture and making this picture look like a painting, or doing automated design and prototyping of systems, and even generating synthetic data, which sounds like very simple, but turns out to be very useful for example, testing other models and so on. And Gen AI can be used in many different industries. Here just an example of 6 different industries and 20 different applications of Gen AI, from healthcare and from pharmacies, pharmaceuticals, to advertising, marketing, to manufacturing, software development, financial services, and media entertainment. And one particular application of generative AI that you already seen in this talk is deepfakes, which essentially is a fully synthetic, hyper-realistic but fake images, videos, or audio recordings created by Gen AI. And here's examples from a website called This Person Doesn't Exist, of random images that image generating models can produce. These are not real people, none of them exist. But they're so realistic that it's very difficult to recognize or determine that these images are completely fake. Here's another example of applications of Gen AI. So here's a commercial, or kind of, not even commercial, it's advertisement of importance of fighting malaria. And it's done by this particular famous figure who, of course, speaks, like not of course, but he's American, speaks only English, very common situation. And let's see if we can make it work.
Malaria isn't just any disease, it's the deadliest disease there's ever been. Se dice que ha matado más de la mitad de la población que existe. وما زالت تقتل طفلا كل دقيقتين. Mais nous pouvons y mettre fin. Nous savons comment, nous en avons la possibilité. हमें और अधिक कार्रवाई की जरूरत है.
我们需要让世界领导人关注。Hivyo tunazindua kampeni ya sauti.
Umaile bawaru bi malaria. Speak up and say, malaria must die. One voice can be powerful, but all of our voices together, then they will have to listen. Malaria must die, so millions can live.
Here's a good example of how generative AI was used to produce video of him speaking all the different languages. Of course, the voices are not his, but the video simulates the movement of his face in a way that it can show mimics actually speaking those particular voices. I hope you appreciate the videos that YouTube suggests me based on my video viewing history. Here's another example that was made by MIT researchers. That introduction to deep learning course. Back in 2020, they used Gen AI to basically produce video of Barack Obama advertising this course in deep learning. And then at that time, they spent $10,000 to train the model to perform this, or to generate this video.
This year I figured we could do something a little bit different, and instead of me telling you how great this class is, I figured we could invite someone else from outside the class to do that instead. So let's check this out first.
Hi everybody, and welcome to MIT Fitness One Platform. On Facebook, and the number of us on YouTube, on here at MIT. We welcome the revolution, so medicine, and energy. We'll start on the methods of medicine and how we can solve incredible problems. With that, please take to our student and you know, Mark Allen, and we're creating new learning and our people guidance. And in this class, you will learn how has been involved in
6S191. Hi everybody, and welcome to MIT 6S191.
And so you can see in this video an example where generative AI was used not only to mimic the video itself, but also the voice of the speaker. So deep fakes, unfortunately, can be used not only for kind of constructive tasks. They can also be potentially threats, or can be used to amplify threats to individuals and organizations. One study that was published last year identified the following threats for individuals and organizations. So there is concerns not only for democratic societies, but for businesses, government organizations, as well as individuals. So today we'll speak, I will talk about two types of use of generative AI that can be kind of weaponized. One is one-shot fakes. And recently there have been a lot of press coverage on the use of these deep fakes for one-shot kind of types of campaigns. Here's just some examples. So the concerns are these deep fakes that are used in politics can confuse public or sway their opinion, and sometimes even possibly affect the election outcomes. Here's an example from
Northern Weeks is a robocall to voters used an AI voice of President Biden to tell them not to vote in the New Hampshire primary, and we still do not know who was behind it. It's the sort of deep-fake, dirty trick that worries election experts, particularly as AI-generated political speech exists in a kind of legal gray area, and lawmakers are far from any kind of legislative solution. There is no indication that this robocall affected results, but Tony O'Sullivan reports on a close election in Europe where a last-minute deepfake may have had an effect.
Do you think does this sound like you?
It does sound like you.
It sounds like him, but it isn't him. This is Michael Šimečka. He is the leader of the main opposition party here in Slovakia, and on the eve of this country's elections last year, he was the target of a deepfake.
My party was advocating a strong pro-Western point of view course to help itself and Russian aggression.
Just 2 days before voting began in that high-stakes election, this audio tape began circulating online. It purported to be a recording of a conversation in which Šimečka talks about stealing the election.
So this didn't come out of the blue. It came against the backdrop of a narrative that the elections were to be legitimate, to be rigged.
His party, Progressive Slovakia, went on to lose the election by a few points.
Do you think this could have changed the results of the election? No way of knowing. We have stats that on Facebook alone, it had 100,000 views, but it probably had some effect.
Slovakia is a country of some 5.5 million people, and it's bordered by Poland and Ukraine.
So a lot of experts say Americans should be paying closer attention to what is happening here in Eastern Europe, as it could be a sign of what is to come in the United States.
My warning is brace yourself for upcoming barrage of deepfakes. We'll be targeting presidential candidates in the US.
Daniel Milo ran the government agency in Slovakia that countered disinformation.
In my professional capacity, I do believe that this deepfake was part of a wider influence campaign by Russia to interfere in the Slovak elections.
On the same day the deepfake emerged, the Russian SVR Foreign Intelligence Agency published a press release that pushed a similar conspiracy theory that the US government and Šimečka were working to rig Slovakia's elections. The director of NATO Stratcom said the deepfake and that Russian statement simultaneously correspond to each other and promote the same false narrative.
So you don't think the SVR statement and the deepfake, the fact that they came out almost at the same time, you don't think that's a coincidence?
No, I don't think that's a coincidence at all. Much more likely explanation, to me at least, is that this is all part of a wider operation that was aimed to disrupt the outcome of the elections as such.
One of the earliest posts of this deepfake came from a pro-Russian politician in Slovakia who also pushed election conspiracy theories on Russian TV. Some of the first people to share it on social media here seem to be pretty Russia-friendly politicians.
They are Russia-friendly politicians. It can't be definitively proven that this has some Russian origin, but of course, the loss for progressive Slovakia and a win for the other side does serve Russian interests, that's for sure.
Kremlin officials did not reply to requests for comment.
But even today, months after the elections here in Slovakia, there are still versions of that deepfake circulating on social media, including on Facebook.
Facebook reaction was very inconsistent and incoherent. In some cases, they just put a label that, you know, this is most likely disinformation. In other cases, they removed the audio recording, but yet in other cases, they left the video untouched.
What's your message to Facebook?
Well, guys, keep your house in order.
Asked about AI misinformation, Facebook's parent company told CNN, we label it and downrank it in feed so fewer people see it. But CNN found multiple instances where the company did not label this deepfake, and their statement did not explain why. Regardless, once a deepfake spreads, the damage can be done. Even some of Shemechka's own supporters were confused.
People who are educated follow politics. They understand what's at stake, but still were confused by it.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. So people who are politically engaged, supporters of you.
Absolutely. So I think this might be the year when we see deepfake boom in election campaigns all across the world.
And it's ominous with our election just ahead. Doni is with us now. You mentioned this could be a sign of what's to come.
Okay, so that was another example of how deepfakes can be used in possibly affecting the outcomes of elections. And the MIT video of Barack Obama, as I mentioned, cost researchers $10,000 to do that, but these days some simple forms of deepfakes can be done at much cheaper. There are many services online that allow people to take a sample of somebody's voice and then generate almost any text or voice that will mimic the original voice and say anything that person wants. And here's an example of the rising machine learning. Of course, you can hear my voice. I find it easier now to deceive and exploit. Here, you can see how easy it is. So that was an example of students doing a term project in my course on cybersecurity, and they used one of those services to basically narrate the whole video of their project using my voice, just for fun. So this is a quick kind of sample of accidents in which deepfakes were used to either sway opinion of citizens before elections, or kind of promote somebody else's agenda, or demote or kind of attack their political competitors and so on. But GenAI can be also used, can be weaponized differently. And this is something that I want to also talk. So aside from so-called one shot, usage of generative AI, like deepfakes, one can also use them in kind of more interactive way. But let's go back to 2011, 13 years ago. Together with my collaborator, Matei, from my department and two PhD students, we created a social bot. Basically, it's a social media account controlled by a program. And then we created a small army of social bots called social botnet, where we had a command and control channel and bot master, and that bot master was controlling hundreds of such social bots. And you can see in this diagram there are social bots in red, and then accounts on social network. It was Facebook, which social bots reached out and sent friendship requests. And some of them were randomly picked, but once we connected with those accounts, our social bots connected with those accounts, then they connected with the kind of mutual friends of mutual connections. So in this video is specifically showing how 15 of our social bots first connected with each other and then connected with random Facebook accounts and then eventually connected with their mutual friends and so on. Basically how they penetrated Facebook to connect with real Facebook accounts. Let's see if it will play for us. So you can see the social bots in red are connected first to each other, accepting friendship requests, and they created this clique that basically has all social bots connected with each other. This was necessary for us so that when we send friendship requests to other Facebook accounts, they would see that our social bots already have some friends, so they're not solo. And you can see how they connect to randomly picked victims and then connected to their friends, because once you connect to somebody, you can see their friends on Facebook. So it was back in 2011. Since Facebook changed the APIs, and now this type of experiment would be impossible to do on Facebook. So we created this video using the logs of our social bots. You can see the real time, like showing exactly when these all changes happen. So now you will see propagation phase, how they start connecting to friends of friends. This video just shows 15 social bots, because showing 100 of them would be just too cluttering. And you can see some of the social bots were more successful than others. Some of them were blocked eventually by Facebook, and they kind of stopped doing anything. So once they connected to their victims, they started to drop the connections among themselves, so that if automated detection would be run, usually automated detection algorithms assume that the fake accounts are interconnected with each other more than with the rest of the network. So they kind of cluster in the graph of the network. Our social bots, we demonstrated with our social bots that once they connect to other Facebook accounts, they drop the connections among themselves. So if somebody is analyzing the graph of connections, they won't see the connections among social bots. They won't know this particular social bot net actually is controlled by one entity. So So this particular social bot was blocked, and you can see it didn't kind of continue working and connecting with friends of their victims. So on the large scale, this is how it looks. Again, this is a realistic graph from our research. So this is a Facebook community of almost 3,000 user accounts. And you can see the clique of 65 fake accounts in the red, and how they connected with the rest of the community. So imagine that if all the nodes in this clique drop the connections among themselves, then again, this is a clear visual illustration of the fact that it would be very difficult, if not impossible, to detect this, this social botnet. So what we discovered in this study is that the more friends somebody has, the more likely they will accept friendship requests from strangers. And the more mutual friends two accounts have, the more likely they, one of them will accept friendship requests, even though they don't have any other connections except for those mutual friends. So this study back in 2011 received the Best Paper Award at the Annual Computer Security Applications Conference and received a lot of publicity. It also received attention from the lawyers who essentially sent a letter to UBC asking to cease and desist. And this study, and UBC lawyers told us later that it cost like more than $100,000 to deal with this issue. So it was fun. So the reason why I brought this study into today's talk is that in the study we showed that feasibility of using social botnets to penetrate social networks. But once they penetrate social networks, they can be weaponized. And back in 2011, we talked about possible kind of ways of weaponizing such social botnets, and one of them was misinformation or disinformation. But at that time, our social bots were very primitive because they were controlled by software without any AI. It was very primitive. It would be sending just friendship requests. Maybe one can put effort and program the software controlling a social bot to do some simple interactions, like send some basic messages. But now, when we fast forward to 2020s, to these days, then these social botnets can be combined with generative AI and be driven by tools like ChatGPT and so on to interact with the other social networking accounts in a way that it would be next to impossible to even distinguish, to realize that this particular account is completely automated. So that's what generative AI brings into the scene. And to kind of test feasibility of something like this, my graduate student created this simple ChatGPT-driven social bot in which this social bot was basically mimicking a real user on discussion forum, online discussion forum, to engage in conversation. So you can see specific log of interaction between real person and ChatGPT-driven chatbot. So as you can see, they can be very convincing, making specific kind of advocating specific point of view, specific agenda. And essentially that makes it quite threatening for the whole society and specifically for democratic countries. So you might know Yuval Noah Harari.
And yes, what I want to talk to you about is AI and the future of humanity. Now, I know that these conferences focus on the ecological crisis facing humanity, but for better or for worse, AI too is part of this crisis. AI can help us in many ways to overcome.
So let me just fast forward to specific parts of his talk that I want to share with you.
And of course, religions throughout history claimed that their holy books were written by a non-human intelligence. This was never true before. This could become true very, very quickly, with far-reaching consequences. Now, on a more prosaic level, we might soon find ourselves conducting lengthy online discussions about abortion, or about climate change, or about the Russian invasion of Ukraine, with entities that we think are fellow human beings, but are actually AI bots. Now the catch is that it's utterly useless, it's pointless for us to waste our time trying to convince an AI bot to change its political views. But the longer we spend talking with the bot, the better it gets to know us and understand how to hone its messages in order to shift our political views or our economic views or anything else. Through its mastery of language, AI, as I said, could also form intimate relationships with people and use the power of intimacy to influence our opinions and well-being. Now, there is no indication that AI has, as I said, any consciousness, any feelings of its own, but in order to create fake intimacy with human beings, AI doesn't need feelings of its own. It only needs to be able to inspire feelings in us, to get us to be attached to it. Now, in June 2022, there was a famous incident when the Google engineer Blake Lemoine publicly claimed that the AI chatbot Lambda, on which he was working, has become sentient. This very controversial claim cost him his job. He was fired. Now, the most interesting thing about this episode wasn't Lemoine's claim, which was most probably false. The really interesting thing was his willingness to risk and ultimately lose his very lucrative job for the sake of the AI chatbot that he thought he was protecting.
So, you're welcome to look up this video. The whole talk by Yuval Noah Harari is quite interesting. He talks about AI in general and threats of AI, but I want to continue with this, with my talk, and also show you this example. Not example, but another opinion. He's an expert in AI, one of the top world experts in AI, and he claims that AI-driven manipulation of voice, video, or text can fool the social media user and make them change their mind on political questions. Professor Benjo is, as mentioned, is one of the top experts in the world on AI, and he made a statement during the hearing at the House of Commons Industry Committee for Canada in February this year. So, as social scientists suggest that research in social science suggests that swaying opinions of people is very difficult. Nonetheless, the use of AI chatbots can create, as I'll talk about this later, will create, basically it will threaten trust. People will stop trusting what they see. As a result, they will be kind of not believing anything, including the correct information. They will stop believing either of this information that they find online. So that's usually the biggest kind of threat. So let's talk about specific threats to democracy. So Gen AI threatens three central pillars of democratic governance: representation, accountability, and trust. Threat to representation. Essentially, if the media landscape is flooded, as well as internet and political communication channels, they would basically, this flooding would undermine efforts by the government to understand constituent sentiments. Basically, what constituents, what citizens, what their opinions, what their views on specific important social and political questions. And I don't think I have a slide for this, but there was a specific case when I think it was Federal Commission, Federative Communications Commission, I think FCC, wanted to change some regulations, and it opened its website for comments from the public. And they received a lot of comments, but 99% of those comments were generated by AI, essentially, because specific lobby group wanted to promote its specific agenda, and they created this flood of comments to try to convince FCC that the public is aligned with this opinion of a specific lobby group. Then, threat to accountability. Generative AI threatens efforts to monitor what elected officials do and the results of their actions. If the public is flooded with fake information, disinformation online, they don't know some of that information about, for example, the actions of the government or the statements of the government. But if they don't know which information is correct and which is not, they don't know what actually government is doing, what the government is stating, and so on. And as a result of this too, there will be a threat to trust, both in the public that will distrust anything that they read, hear, or see online, as well as the government, because the government cannot trust online channels to deliver information or comments or input from the constituents. So here's just some of the illustrations of democratic societies depending on the public opinion. For example, this year, around approximately half of the world had elections. In half of the world, in countries, half of the world have elections, while some 4 billion people in 76 nations. And most of the election campaigns these days are online, of course through TV, but also a lot of online happening. So threats to representation, flooding communication channels to undermine efforts by government, to sense constituents' sentiment. And I mentioned this example with FCC, but there was another interesting study that was published in 2023 that did the following experiment. It was done in US. So in US there are senators who represent specific areas, regions of US, usually specific states in the Senate, US Senate. And they often receive letters from the constituents from those states, from individuals who send letters expressing their opinions on specific political or social aspects that, for example, are discussed and being voted in the Senate. So this is how often senators kind of sense what's the sentiment. And these researchers used one of these basic versions of ChatGPT. It was back in 2022, or even maybe 2021, and they generated letters. Some of the letters were, for example, on the left-hand side, this is a human-written right-wing constituent letter, and on the right-hand side, for comparison, it's AI-written right-wing constituent letter. And they wanted to see with which letters the representatives, the legislative representatives will engage more. So what they found that letters generated by, at that time, GPT-3 and by humans were not that much different in terms of engagement by the senators and their officers. So they conclude that legislators can be misled about constituent sentiment. And in that article, they specifically state the malicious act capable of easily generating thousands of unique communications could potentially skew legislators' perception of which issues are most important to their constituents, as well as how constituents feel about any given issue. And this is the example that I mentioned about FCC. Eventually they found who has submitted all these comments, and they prosecuted that company. So that company, just want to mention that the company submitted 8 million fake comments on the FCC website. And all thanks to ChatGPT, because with ChatGPT they were able to produce that large number of comments that all look somewhat different, but all communicating the same kind of, supporting the same viewpoint. So now let's move to threats to accountability, which is undermining efforts to monitor what elected officials do and the results of their actions. And there was an interesting study published in 2023 that demonstrates that AI-generated propaganda is just as believable as propaganda written by humans, which was also quite interesting. So again, threat actors can weaponize generative AI to flood different online channels with a specific propaganda that is all can be generated easily at very low cost and at very large scale. And I already mentioned the examples of Slovakia and the other examples here. And last but not least, and I would say even most important, is threat to trust. People simply might not know what to believe believe and will therefore distrust the entire information ecosystem. So this is very critical for democratic societies because democratic societies rely on citizens, on constituents to discuss important for the society questions and arrive to some kind of convergence, some kind of opinion. Yeah. And so if people cannot trust the information online that they receive online, then essentially there cannot be productive conversation, productive discourse online or even in person. So deepfakes can be used for that, but also, as I showed you before, AI-driven chatbots can be used to, again, run large-scale campaigns that try to interfere with democratic discourses online. So basically, generative AI enables low-cost and large-scale misinformation and disinformation. They can also do micro-targeting, where AI can be used to learn demographics, given the demographics of specific participants of those discourses. They can learn how to be the most effective in convincing them of specific opinion. Social media also enables disinformation or dissemination of misinformation. It makes it effortless because social media allows somebody who has access to social media, like online social networks, propagate some specific opinions at very large scale. And this can be also targeted because, again, there is quite a bit of information about the demographics of each account, like each profile. That information can be used to create targeted campaigns on specific users. So, which could result in erosion of trust in media and the government. So that's basically essentially the key threat to democracy. So I'm still trying to understand what the literature says and in theory what can be done to mitigate those risks. Unfortunately, it's all about arms race. Those of you who already taken courses, one or more courses in cybersecurity, you know that essentially it's arms race between the attackers and defenders. Attackers come up with a new attack, defenders come up with a defense, but usually defense is not perfect, and usually it only reduces the, increases the cost of that attack. It rarely prevents the attack completely. And it often relies on detection of the attack or detection of the threat agents. But then the attackers improve their attack techniques and tools and tactics that reduces the effectiveness of defenses. Then defenders again try to improve their defenses and so on. And here's one specific example that a paper that reported a study of 8 different schemes and techniques for detecting deepfakes. And even though these authors of the schemes were claiming very high effectiveness of their mechanisms, when researchers who reported this specific study evaluated those mechanisms using kind of same data set and they performed very small modifications, they were able to decrease the effectiveness of those mechanisms significantly. You can see on this graph the reduction of the recall, and if you can't remember what recall is, you can see the formula for recall. So essentially, how many true positives are detected or the approach has given the combination of true positives and false negatives. You can see that the reduction sometimes was up to 50%. And if recall goes down so much, then essentially on the large scale, this approach can be thrown away because it's not effective at all. If you're talking about tens of thousands of samples that have to be determined whether they are deep fakes or not. And this specific technique, this specific reduction in the effectiveness of the approaches was merely due to use of some custom training data. So they used regular some image generator that was like off-the-shelf vanilla image generator. But then they used some of the additional images to train that image generator in addition to what has been trained. It's called customization. So they customized this image generator with a few additional images. It was very few, like up to like somewhere in the range of 10 images. And because of this generator was producing images that the techniques that used to detect those images as deepfakes, we are not detecting them anymore. So this is one specific example, and I just want to point out, I'm not sure if you can see it, but these results were published just a few months ago at the top security conference called IEEE Symposium on Security and Privacy. When it comes to text, there is a question, for example, for text produced for posting comments online, or for example, interaction. But for interactions, it's even more complicated. But let's take just one short type of attacks where somebody, let's say, posts a bunch of comments on a specific topic or sends a bunch of letters to legislators. Can today technology distinguish between human written text and AI generated text? It can, but unfortunately it's not effective either. I don't have a slide for that, but what the literature says, it's not effective either. And even worse, the Gen AI technology keeps improving every month. And what we so far see is that ability to mimic human written text keeps improving. So I anticipate that in just few years, the technology of generating text will be so good that there will be no way to distinguish between human written text and AI generated text. So unfortunately, there is no kind of, I'm not presenting a lot of results that give us hope, but this seems to be like very important topic for discussion, for research, because if what Yuval Noah Harari and other prominent figures say about the threats of AI, and what the studies suggest about ability of people to kind of fall victims to either deepfakes or some other types of AI amplified attacks, there is a real threat to democratic processes and as a result to democracies around the world. So to summarize what we discussed today, the capabilities of AI that allow to generate a low-cost and large-scale believable content that mimics humans and or their communications. There are two types of abuse: chatbots that can be very interactive and so-called one-shot fakes, like deep fakes. So the pillars of democracy, threat to which are significantly amplified by generative AI, are representation, accountability, and trust. So with this, I would like to open for questions, and I want to show you some of the papers that we published in that study, or research project that we've done back in 2011, and we continued to 2015 to develop techniques for detecting social botnets and so on. But here I would like to open floor for questions.
Okay. Okay, thank you, Professor Kosta. Any question from some of you?
Good morning, sir. My question is, with the rise of deepfakes and AI, who is held accountable for the actions done by AI? Is it the company or the AI? And what are the proper measures by law on this?
Can you repeat the question, please?
So, with like the rise of AI and everything, who should be held responsible for the harm done by AI? Is it like the company or the AI itself? And like, what are the laws that are implemented to counterattack this?
Yeah, it's a very good question. So I understand the question is about who should be responsible for this. And I would say AI, as many other technologies that humans invented, for example, electricity, atomic energy, nuclear energy, even industrialization. So all these technologies, electricity, industrialization, they impacted societies, and what we kind of, as humans on this planet, arrived to is that we adapted to the new technologies, to the new developments, and learn how to live with them. I think it's, again, you all know Harari makes an interesting point, is that industrialization took us like at least a century or maybe 2 centuries as humans to learn how to live with this. And there are a lot of experiments done. For example, Soviet Union was an example of experiment where they tried to basically create society in which industrialization was used to control the people, and First and Second World Wars were all experiments in some sense of industrialization. Nuclear energy can be used in both peaceful and non-peaceful ways. So this is another example of technology that can be used and abused. So, and we know that there is no point of blaming scientists or companies who develop those technologies. It's about how this technology is used. Same thing with AI. So it's more the question of how those who abuse technology can be made accountable, or how technology can be developed in a way that makes it easier to detect abuses, and how this abuse can be controlled. Same thing with weapons. In different countries, there are different laws about use of weapons or even possession of weapons. Again, weapons can be used for protection. They can be also used for killing innocent people and so on. So AI, in some sense, is similar. It can be used for improving lives of people, but it also can be used for as a weaponized for attacks on democracy and so on. So it's for as researchers, specifically in technical fields, the first question is it possible to detect abuse of AI for misinformation, disinformation, or something else? And then if it's detectable, then who can be made responsible? And here we basically fall into the area of economics of security. For example, often abuses, let's say, phishing campaigns, domain hijacking, malware distribution, pirating of copyrighted material. All this, in all these cases, often it's it's difficult to go after specific entities, specific users who abuse the technology. It's you can see often it's the intermediaries who are made liable for the technology. For example, if somebody posts copyrighted material, let's say a video with a song that is copyrighted on YouTube, YouTube will take it down. And YouTube is doing it because YouTube is liable if the owner of the copyrighted material contacts YouTube and points them to this particular video that in which the copyrighted song was used. YouTube is liable for taking this particular content down. So often in dealing with cybersecurity threats, the so-called intermediaries, like service providers, made responsible. And this is what we see with AI in this case. Remember in one of the news reports, they mentioned that Facebook and many other companies these days, like YouTube, they all now basically made essentially liable for keeping these deepfakes online. So if somebody contacts them and requires them to take down those deepfakes, they have to take them down. And also they develop the technology to detect those deepfakes. But again, imagine with Facebook, which has, I don't know how many, 6 billion people on Facebook or something like this. Imagine how many posts they have to process these days per, I don't know, per hour, probably millions of posts. And they have to make automated decisions whether specific content is deepfake or not. And if the detection technology is not perfect, even if there is a like 1% chance that it will give false negative, then on the scale of Facebook and Instagram and other social media providers, this ends up with many deepfakes getting through undetected. So unfortunately, even though these companies most likely will be liable for detecting and taking down deepfakes, it's very hard to imagine that they will be able to have perfect detection. And also there's another aspect of this kind of situation, and that is some of the deepfakes are arcane. Deepfakes can be used for kind of constructive purposes. There is a movie, like documentary about deepfakes, and I think it was South Korea that they visit and they show all these different examples of how people use deepfakes. For example, there is a folk dancer who is very popular, and the government wants to promote kind of this specific type of folk dance, so they create a deepfake of this dancer, and now this deepfake is used to promote that. Somebody created this persona online using these technologies for deepfakes, and this persona became very popular in pop culture. So basically the person uses this persona because they don't want to kind of perform themselves, they don't feel that they can be as successful as this deepfake persona. But this deepfake persona, again, is basically an example of how deepfakes or generative AI can be used for something that is not threatening anything, and even more, it can help people and companies to reduce the cost of their businesses or improve support for customers and so on. So unfortunately, we can't just say, well, let's forbid all the use of AI to create deepfakes or create chatbots. Some of them are quite useful. For example, there is a lot of research on how chatbots can be used to support patients through online services, so that, for example, the doctors don't have to be on call 24/7. So there are a lot of kind of very constructive ways of using same technology that can be used for can be abused for disinformation and misinformation.
Okay. Yeah. Question. Okay. The questions. Okay. You can continue.
Regarding the detection of human record versus AI, so how will we differentiate between these two? Do we have any rules for detection of AI? Lot of time when we write sometimes, maybe writing some things on the top. So when we pass it on zero charge or any other tools to detect AI detection, they also sometimes detect some. And the second question would be, what are the ethical challenges that do we have currently?
Can you repeat the second question, please?
Yeah. What are the ethical challenges do we have in academia?
Ethical challenges.
Yeah, ethical challenges. Do we have for the implementation of generative AI in the context of academia?
I'm not sure I can answer the second question, because ethics is a kind of separate field of research. I know a little bit about it, mostly in the context of cybersecurity research, but I can't say that I didn't look into ethics of generative AI in general. The first question was about how, what are the properties of text used by generative AI that can be used to detect this generative AI, not human reasoning. Yeah? So my understanding is the most common attribute is a distribution of words and distribution of letters in the text. So the way people write, the distribution is somewhat different from the way generative AI writes. Like also lengths of sentences and so on. Everybody has their own style, but also kind of the way people write is, if you look at the kind of frequency analysis and different analysis of distributions, you will see there is some differences. So this is kind of high-level answer to your question. But kind of the point that I wanted to bring when I was talking about the challenges there is that the researchers in AI keep improving the technology, and these differences become less and less and less. And so as a result, text generated by AI becomes less and less detectable. So that's the difficulty now. With chatbots, there was another interesting experiment where they tried to see whether ChatGPT generated conversations can be used to perform phishing attacks on people in kind of as effectively as human-based attacks. And so in those experiments, they ask people to role-play. Imagine that you work for this company, and then you answer calls. So the researchers created a system where the system will use different technologies to call this particular number and engage in a conversation. And the conversation was driven by something like ChatGPT. And they wanted to understand what's the success rate of these type of phishing attacks, and the attack would be considered successful if, let's say, the person who plays a role of a CEO or secretary would give over the phone the personal phone number of the CEO. So it's kind of a little bit contrived scenario, but still, the reason why I'm bringing this up, when they interviewed participants to see whether these participants were able to distinguish, to determine that there was conversation with somebody who is not human, essentially. What they found is that participants were kind of detecting it because the conversation wasn't as easy flowing. For example, the participant would try to answer something, they would start speaking, and then would make a pause. And the AI part would start speaking, even though from the context of the conversation it's clear the participant is taking pause because they're saying, let me just look into the address book to find this number. They start looking at the address book, there is a pause, and the other side that is driven by ChatGPT will start speaking because the side recognizes the pause. So things like this were kind of used by participants to sense that there's something off. Okay. But again, this technology improving, these type of signs that tell you that this is not a human, they will go away. So the more Gen AI becomes more kind of social, the more difficult it will be distinguished from the humans.